EM Weekly starting right now, bringing emergency managers from around the world together to learn, share and collaborate.
Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are in this great world. First of all, we got to start off by saying, well, yesterday was the Marine Corps birthday, so happy birthday to all my brothers and sisters from the Marines, and of course the Navy Corpsmen. And then today is Veterans Day, so for all those that served, thank you for your service. And it's always a pleasure to be talking about that on such a day. So the 11th hour, the 11th day of the 11th month, we signed the armistice, and this has started Armistice Day, which we turned into Veterans Day. So all the veterans out there, thanks for your service, brothers and sisters. All right, speaking of that, though, right, we have to get into some really cool stuff. We're going to talk about crowdsourcing and what it is to bring. Well, what is crowdsourcing? How do we use it as emergency managers? And it's interesting, but we actually found an expert in that field. Emily, welcome to EM Weekly.
Hey, Todd. Thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure for sure. So it's afternoon for you, or I guess just noon out there in New Hampshire. So, I mean, you're out there in the middle of nowhere, kind of, right?
I'm around some people at least, so I can find a crowd every once in a while.
So let's talk about that. Finding crowdsourcing. What's it mean?
Yeah, so I have the pleasure of supporting our crowdsourcing coordination unit here in FEMA, and I do work in the New England office in Boston. But I was able to kind of form a crowdsourcing group down at our headquarters element in DC. And one of the questions I get asked a lot is, what is even crowdsourcing? And crowdsourcing really is a participatory approach to gathering like ideas, content, services, really whatever you can think of from a large group of people. And typically we think of it through online or, digital services. And I think if we had to make some guesses about, what's crowdsourcing, there's lots of businesses out there that use crowdsourcing as their business model. Think about Waze, for instance. If you want to know if there's a traffic jam, you go on Waze, and it's gathering content from the crowd, which is informing, the traffic patterns on their site. And there's lots of places that use that as their business model or their technique. And I really became interested in it during the 2017 hurricane seasons when we were trying to understand what was going on where, and, how do we tap into the crowd to get situational awareness as emergency managers.
So I remember looking at it's not quite, well, maybe it is crowdsourcing. Back, I think it was like Moore, Oklahoma, or it might be Joplin, one of those two places. They always have tornadoes, and it was when Facebook was sort of first kind of a thing, and they were sharing information via Facebook. Now I know that a lot of the public safety people were upset with this because they wanted to make sure the information was vetted to them, and we were really slow about picking up using Facebook or social media in general for sharing information. Now it seems to be if you don't have it, you're really it's kind of behind the curve, I suppose. Is that a really good example of crowdsourcing, or is that something different?
No, I think it really is. So like 2 points you just made. I think when I talk to emergency managers about the crowdsourcing imperative is the whole community, our community expects that public safety has figured out how to use social media and open source. Okay, so whether or not we want to, it's an expectation on us as public servants that we've figured out social media, open source platforms, sensors, all these things. And crowdsourcing, one element of it is social media. And there are other things like remote sensing, open source data, all different ways that we can collect crowdsource information. The example of Facebook community groups is a great example. And, one of my mentors told me the story of the snowstorm in Atlanta and how a Facebook group led by a senior citizen quilter organized the delivery of thousands of blankets to people stranded on the side of the road, something that public safety was not able to do. And also they were busy doing public safety things, not delivering blankets. So there's lots of ways that the community can organize around a topic, an issue, gather the resources and distribute them is one example, but they can also gather information and share it. There is the issue of misinformation, but the crowd in general is very good at, sourcing out this information, and especially if we as emergency managers partner with influencers and people with, sway in the community that are trusted voices. That's one way that we can help, raise the official information through these different dispersed networks. But I think that's a great example, and we see after every disaster, there's always a Facebook community group that's organizing to connect, needs with resources, which is a perfect example of crowdsourcing.
So I know technology helps with organizing that, right? As far as Facebook or Twitter or whatnot. But crowdsourcing really has been around for a long time, in the sense of, I remember as a kid, we would get together and put care packages together to send out around Christmas time to the homeless, or to troops overseas. That you see a lot of people that do that all the time. Is that crowdsourcing at its core, or is that different?
No, absolutely. And, thinking of to me, one of the biggest players in the crowdsourcing game for a long time is the National Weather Service and their Skywarn spotters.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, right. So emergency management, public safety has been doing crowdsourcing in different ways. And so I think of the Skywarn spotters as a great example. And in fact, we have partnered with a lot of spotter groups to help conduct different things like damage assessments, gathering photos and geolocating them on maps. So when some people are hesitant about, can we trust the crowd? Well, if you give the crowd a little bit of information, like maybe a Skywarn training, right, well, we do trust them to report official numbers on rainfall, snow amounts, hail, all these things. Those are become the official record. USGS and their earthquake shake map uses Twitter to help map an earthquake, faster than our seismological detectors give us. So there's lots of, groups out there that are already using crowdsourcing. And one of the things I want to say is that, there's passive crowdsourcing and there's active crowdsourcing. We can go out and engage the crowd in a two-way conversation and ask them for something, or we can use, data that's being collected passively and incorporate that into our situational awareness or whatever we're trying to do as emergency managers, like partnering with Waze, who has a Waze for Government program that will share traffic data with your jurisdiction. So, there's different ways to do it depending on what resources you have in your community or in your emergency management program to integrate these different types of crowdsourcing methods, to support your programs. Whether it's, I'm talking a lot about response, but you can use it for preparedness as well, as you're describing, but also in recovery efforts. What are the unmet needs? Right. And how do we match a resource with a need?
Excuse me. Yeah, I want to kind of talk about that for a second, on the idea of recovery. I forget what it's called. There was a guy who I actually interviewed. I'm terrible, but his idea was creating an app that you could say, "Hey, I need a generator," for instance, right? And then somebody goes, "Oh, I have a generator and I can bring it to you." Or, people that are unaffected could actually pre-purchase stuff through either Amazon or Home Depot or whatever. And people could actually go and say, "Oh, I'm Emily. Todd bought a generator for me, and here's my receipt." And then it could do stuff like that. I think that's really kind of a neat way of doing things as well. And that seems to be ground. I mean, it's individuals doing this, right? It's not anything that we're doing.
Well, absolutely. But I think that emergency management has a place to play when we talk about, for example, voluntary organizations active in disaster. One of the partners we have at FEMA is called Crisis Cleanup. And they use basically a crowdsourced tool where people can submit tickets, and then they can be matched with a verified group that can come in and help them maybe muck out, or their platform is amazing. It can be used for a lot of different things, matching a resource with a need. But as emergency managers, we need to tap into these different tools and platforms. During COVID, we went into this very, time where we had scarcity like we've never seen before. All right. So we had a scarcity mindset. We were short on lots of things. And the power of the crowd is abundance. you have everything you need if you can tap into the crowd, because we can just basically work as a community to match people up with the whatever they need. And it might just be information. A lot of times people just are looking for information, but like you're talking about, how do we use a technology to match people with maybe services or goods? Airbnb, for example, you can work with them to activate their emergency sheltering program, and it really helps because it's a verified way of doing something where people are protected and they're matched up, appropriately with the resources they need. But then as emergency managers, when we do this, when we are leveraging this technology, we can also get that information, which we can use to inform recovery efforts. Where do we need housing? Where was there a lot of muck outs being done that we should include that in our request for FEMA declaration? So there's all that data is being collected. How do we use that to inform our recovery efforts as well? So I think it's a wide spectrum of what is crowdsourcing. So, my suggestion is to all the listeners is think about a project you're working on and how do you incorporate crowdsourcing into that to kind of dip your toes into this.
So Dan Scott, who couldn't be with us today live, but he's with us in spirit. He asked, what is the crowdsourcing tips for emergency management? And then he goes in second on that one is, what type of training is available to learn, teach, and sustain crowdsourcing? Those are good questions, Dan.
Those are great questions. Like, how do we get started? So a couple things. So when I was learning about this, I partnered with IAEM Region 1, and we decided to collate all the resources we could find on a Google site we made called crowdsourcem.org, which links to a lot of official resources that came out from DHS Science and Technology. So DHS Science and Technology put out a playbook for engaging digital volunteers. And then there's also, through the federal government, citizenscience.gov, which has another playbook for crowdsourcing. And we actually, part of the reason that I got involved in this is there is the Act for Crowdsourcing and Citizen Science. So the government said, hey, we need to do this. There's a mandate for federal agencies to leverage crowdsourcing and citizen science the best they can. So that's a great place to get started. But the DHS Science and Technology publications lay out a great, what I call the crawl, walk, run model, right? So we're not all starting off hiring, trying to tap into an army of crowdsourcing volunteers. We might be looking at just partnering with an existing technology or platform to leverage some of the information they can. Maybe we're going to incorporate it into a resiliency campaign. One of the examples on the toolkit is a resiliency campaign done in the city of Nashua, New Hampshire, where residents were asked to contribute to a map where they highlighted places maybe where there's repetitive loss or flooding, where there's real value to the community that we really need to protect. And we were able to kind of engage the whole community in an online way, kind of actually build up a lot of enthusiasm for a resiliency plan, but really lighten the load of having one staff member have to go around and look at all these places. And so there's a wide range of different tools that have been put out, and we just try to kind of collate them all on that site, crowdsourcem.org. We're always looking for other examples to add, and it just is a place for other emergency managers to go and also contribute to the body of knowledge of crowdsourcing and emergency management.
Oh, excuse me. Oh, so as we get into this, the idea of crowdsourcing as well, and kind of going back to analog, I suppose, for lack of a better term, maybe not analog, is the idea. David Goldberg brings up the idea of amateur radio for community supporting NOAA and Skywarn, and also here in California, we have a very active amateur radio group that goes out and looks for fires, or so it's through the Fire Corps, I believe, is who uses them. So those are really great examples of using other types of stuff that's not digital. We're gonna take a quick break. When we come back, I want to get into a little bit about your background and how you got into crowdsourcing.
Awesome.
Everybody, next week I'm going to be in New York City at the NDEM conference, and we'll be streaming the show live from there. I'm pretty excited about that. Dan's going to be joining me as well, and we are going to be speaking to Craig Fugate and Pete Gaynor on what it is to be the top guy, the emergency manager at the top, leadership and the direction of emergency management more. So hopefully you can join us for that special live streaming event that we're going to be doing live from New York City. Or if you're in the area, if you're in New York, or if you want to fly out there with me, you're more than welcome to come. And it's NDEM, and please follow us there. And like to see you guys, and looking forward more towards that as well. And also, I also want to talk a little bit about, since we're talking about technology and crowdsourcing and some of the cool stuff that's out there. Disaster Tech, Sean Griffin and his team over there. Matter of fact, they're hiring if you guys are looking for a job. Go to disastertech.com, and you can go over there and see if it's a fit for you. But they are also doing some really great work when it comes to technology, and they have a couple different programs over there, the DICE program, and they also have the Voltron program, which is really exciting as far as training and how to really get people up and running, and it's great. So I think you should really check it out. So don't forget to go to Disaster Tech, and also follow them on Twitter. That's disastertech.net, I think. Anyway, guys, Emily, come back in.
All right, I'm back.
So you started local EM, right? And then kind of moved over from there. How did you get into crowdsourcing? How did that become like your thing?
Well, that it's a really great question. And how I originally got started was actually at the City of Nashville, where I gave that example. We were able to participate in a cross-border exercise, the CAUSE exercise series with Canada. And as part of that, we were exercising our CERT team, which had a dual purpose as being a VOS, a virtual operations support team, which is basically the most active form of crowdsourcing you can have, is a team of digital volunteers, as I call them, that are scouring open source information to create situational awareness products. And so we partnered with New Brunswick, Canada, and we simulated a hurricane coming up the coast. While the hurricane was hitting us in very far inland New Hampshire, as realistic as it could be, the team in Canada was collecting, open source information and providing us with situational awareness. As the hurricane passed, we provided them with situational awareness. And that's when I really got into it, like, wow, there's all this open source information. How are we tapping into that, but moving it from just information to intelligence? And it was a great way at the time, as the team manager for the CERT team, to have something for them to do. And I think that's something that every CERT manager can attest to, is having non-disaster work for CERT teams to do as a way to dual train them. And then fast forward, I was working at the state of New Hampshire Homeland Security and Emergency Management. Then I came to FEMA. And in 2017, I deployed down to our headquarters element right as Hurricane Harvey hit. And Hurricane Maria made landfall, and at the time, our administrator, Brock Long, got on the floor of the NRCC, our response center, and said, I need to know the status of all the hospitals this time tomorrow. And it wasn't really going to be possible. Our on-the-ground team said it was going to take 2 weeks. So I had this idea, well, I'll just try to use crowdsourcing to figure it out. And we worked with an international team called the Standby Task Force. And in 48 hours, they had mapped the status of all the hospitals in Puerto Rico. And 2 weeks later, the on-the-ground teams confirmed that information was correct. And that's when I really got hooked on it. The power of the crowd when you're in a complete information blackout. How do you use what you have, piece it together, leverage people in non-affected areas, and build these situational awareness products that ultimately became the basis for our hub and spoke model to rebuild the healthcare system in Puerto Rico. So that's how we really got started. And it's grown from there. And every hurricane season, we have crowdsourcing groups that help with situational awareness to our National Response Coordination Center in DC.
Why do you think some emergency managers are resistant to crowdsourcing?
Well, what I've mostly encountered is a bad experience with a tweet from social media. Usually, I like to think about it as, what I say to everyone is, when a call comes in, a 911 call comes in, and it's not quite accurate, how many times has that happened to all of us? it's the same thing. So if you take one piece of information and go on that, that's not crowdsourcing. That's taking one account. And crowdsourcing is, gathering a large amount of information and using it. So statistically, you're going to be getting the information you need. So typically, I haven't met anyone who is against it once they're able to see, how to put together a program that's going to get them accurate, timely information. That's what everybody wants. We want accurate, timely information. We don't want to be chasing around bad information. And I think that if you are engaging the crowd properly, you can work right through that kind of stuff. But I do agree, there's a lot of misinformation and rumors. And actually, one of the powerful things about the crowd is dispelling those rumors, is calling them out. And, some of the groups we work with use open source tools like Google Photo. You can drop a photo into Google and it'll show you that photo's from 11 years ago. That's
Right.
not a photo of this disaster. And they'll comment on that tweet and go, this is not a photo of this disaster. So they're helping you cut out those rumors. But honestly, usually when I talk to people, I go to different conferences, talk about crowdsourcing, everyone's like, wow, I just didn't understand how to use it in a way that I wasn't ending up chasing my tail. And I totally get that.
It's funny. I live in Brea and California, and we have this thing on Facebook called the Brea Buzz. It's a group that just join, or it's a group, and I get more information from that Brea Buzz than I do. My wife makes fun of me because I'm like, oh, I heard about this going on. She's like, where'd you hear it? The Brea Buzz? I'm like, yeah, that's where I heard it. And but it is the same thing. It's it's definitely crowdsourcing information that's out there, not just on the political stuff or anything like that, but also things like, hey, this road is closed, don't go, there's whatever is going on. So I appreciate it. But how do we get citizens, residents to really help out with that, like to join a group like the Brea Buzz, or that they're not afraid, they're not fearful of getting bad information?
Yeah, no, I think what I've learned, and I've been learning through this process as well, is the importance of, finding the influencers in a community. Because it's not necessarily like they're going to trust me. Like, oh, yeah, I'm from whatever government agency, right, follow me. Not really. But if you're able to find influencers within your community, maybe it's a religious leader, maybe it's somebody who's active on the school board organization, and those are the people that you want to connect with and form a partnership with and say, hey, if you follow our social media account, this is where we're going to put out official information about the storm or a shelter or reporting damages. Can you help us by amplifying those messages, or can you help us by collecting this information or asking your followers to collect this information? That is kind of the dispersing of the crowd there, because the point of the crowd is not to connect with every single person. It's to put something out there and then the crowd runs with it, and they use their networks, their partnerships, their relationships to gather that information or that resource, however works for their community group, which is, I think the other part is, the world is so interconnected. If there is a disruption in one place, it has a domino effect.
Right.
But we can use that to our advantage because we're so connected. Others in different corners of the country can contribute to whatever we're trying to do.
So Melissa says the issue with the small community groups is that there's a lot of them, and it's kind of true. I mean, like how do we manage, or as far as getting information from all those groups that are out there to kind of putting information out? Like, how do you dispel rumor from truth?
Yeah, no, so that is a really good point, because I feel like community groups multiply, especially when there is a disaster or something is happening. And then you might have multiple places where information is. And I think, again, that is when you might want to look at some more active crowdsourcing techniques, where you might have a group of people whose job it is to monitor those pages, maybe contribute, become trusted members. The thing with Facebook groups is a lot of them are private and you have to be allowed to join. So they're not exactly open groups, open source. And that's when sometimes, it can be kind of a little bit of a circle of misinformation. So that's why it is important to try to engage those groups. But, it's also, you can't be everywhere at all times. So you have to prioritize, what is your goal? Is your goal to promote official information? Is your goal to gather information or resources and then kind of figure out, okay, where is the most bang for our buck? Because there is a lot to do with crowdsourcing, and the active route, isn't probably as realistic for smaller organizations who maybe are an emergency management office of one.
Right.
And you might need to think about, how do you partner with other emergency managers? And the last place I was at a conference in Wisconsin in the beginning of 2020, and that's exactly what was happening. I was there speaking with a group of county emergency managers who wanted to work together to leverage crowdsourcing, knowing that when one of them was impacted, the others could implement some crowdsourcing techniques to support them. So kind of their own internal crowdsourcing group to then be able to tap into. They were specifically looking at the spotter group as one of those trusted resources to get that kind of information out. But there are a lot of challenges to overcome. I don't have all the answers. And I think that it's part of, organizing, what is our strategy for crowdsourcing and emergency management? How do we build these tools and techniques? But ultimately, it goes back to that imperative that I say, the whole community. The community expects us to figure out how to get this information. If they're putting it in an open source place, they think we can see it, and we've organized and acted around it. So how do we head in that direction?
So Dan asks again, he goes, where do you recommend someone who knows nothing about crowdsourcing to begin their journey?
Oh, I think where I would begin is the DHS Science and Technology Playbook for Digital Volunteers. It gives a great overview of the kind of spectrum of crowdsourcing, from that passive to just tapping into open data sources that you can collect, to that more active role of maybe even forming a digital volunteer group or partnering with one. I would really start with those documents. It was put together by the DHS Social Media Working Group, so it was made up of first responders and emergency managers who were, in the early days trying to figure out, how does public safety use social media? But they really expanded to, okay, how do we use crowdsourcing and open source information to inform, response and recovery efforts as public safety? So that would be, I think, the starting place for anybody looking to kind of dip their toes into, how do we use crowdsourcing as emergency managers?
Do you see some of these crowdsourcing? Melissa brings up the idea, the concept here, that a lot of people are turning political on these crowdsource on these platforms. Have you seen that be a problem during disaster, or like an active disaster, not necessarily COVID?
I don't think I have personally experienced that or seen that, but I think that's always a risk. But I have seen during, big, large scale disasters, groups really come together, rallying around that issue or topic of humanitarian relief. We're trying neighbors helping neighbors, right? Think of the Cajun Navy. There's another group, Crowdsource Rescue HQ, out of Texas. And, they organize people who want to go help other people when just response is overwhelmed. So I think there's always that risk. But I think, disaster relief, politics always has something to play in it, right? But that's not our game, right? As emergency managers, we're trying to coordinate the relief of our community, trying to get, back to where we were, if not better, build back better. And I know you talk about kind of resilience or anti-fragile. And I think, when I was thinking of that concept, of the anti-fragile concept, how it has to do with, scarcity or abundance. And when you have the crowd, you have what you need. It's just a matter of connecting those pieces. And that's really what it's about. I think it has a powerful place to play in our discourse of being able to get people to, relate to each other and see, hey, neighbors helping neighbors. That's really what it's about. And maybe that will kind of bring us back to the place of realizing, we're all impacted by disasters, and we all can come together, and, when we're facing the same challenges, we can all come together and help provide that relief to the community.
Yeah, it's kind of cool. And the tools that are out there today make it easy for the community to do this, right? I mean, outside of the Facebook and the social media type stuff, I mean, like the Zello app, which is like not Zillow where you buy a house, Zello, it's like hello with a Z, was used extensively during disasters because it turned the phone into a walkie-talkie type thing. But the cool part about that was the Cajun Navy, for instance, utilized it to dispatch themselves around to help people out. So there's a lot of neat stuff out there that you can use and really work with the community groups. And and Melissa, to your point regarding the politics stuff, and sometimes you just can't avoid it. But at the other end of it, I think that if you're helping manage now I say manage, like really putting good information out there and having your crowd share that information, I think then they're going to trust that information more than not. So, but I think it's a two-way street, right? Or am I?
Yeah, no, and that's the whole thing about crowdsourcing is it's supposed to be a two-way street. It's not just you put something out there. It's a conversation. You're going back and forth. And General McChrystal has a great book called A Team of Teams. And I really prescribe to that model that, the interconnectedness of our communities, if we can give some direction as emergency managers of, where are we having gaps? Where are we missing information? What would we like to know or have? Those things will come to us if we engage the crowd. I'm thinking about, COVID, for example, all of the donation, I'm not for donation drives usually because I don't like the mess of donations, but when we talked about needing to donate masks to public safety organizations at the beginning of the disaster, what was a shortage, we were able to find when we engaged the crowd correctly. Same thing can happen with information. A lot of groups now are tapping, especially emergency managers, are tapping into their GIS teams, and they're leveraging the crowdsourcing reporting apps on the different GIS tools to collect damage assessments in near real time. These can inform your response efforts, right? Where do we need to go? Where is there an urgent need? But they're critical when you're doing your post-damage assessment and you're trying to say, how much damage did we have and what is this going to cost? We used to send out teams door to door to do that kind of stuff. Now we're using remote sensing, which is another crowdsourcing technique. How can you use drones, aerial imagery, satellite imagery to do remote sensing to collect information? Again, not just for response, but also maybe mitigation projects or different preparedness projects that you're doing. Those are all on the spectrum of crowdsourcing, just basically using, a large amount of data and from an open source that you're able to, create into whatever product you're trying to do to inform your program.
Right. I mean, yeah, think about this too. I mean, I know that the Ring doorbell, for instance, is one of those things that people have willingly giving their Ring doorbell information to law enforcement to help solve crimes in the community. And just as an example, is something like that.
Like the adopt a fire hydrant. I mean, right. I'm always like, can somebody, adopt a culvert? But no, yeah, adopt a fire hydrant, clear it out, making it into, again, a whole community effort. We go out as the fire department and pay them and they could shovel out every fire hydrant? Is that a good use of their time? Or is it more of a community thing where everybody adopts a fire hydrant, keeps it clear, maybe posts a picture of it, kind of, again, raising awareness in the community, getting people engaged in being part of a culture of preparedness that we're trying to promote. So all these things, I think if we look around, we can point to different crowdsourcing elements that have been in public safety for a long time, Crime Stoppers, all these different things. Right. We've been using crowdsourcing for a long time in public safety, but how do we want to formalize the use of it in emergency management? And different platforms out there that we might use as emergency managers, technology platforms, are increasingly including open source technology, crowdsourcing into their tools so that we can tap into them as emergency managers. And I think we'll head into that direction where it's more of an automated or passive crowdsourcing, where we can tap into other technologies, but there's always the place to engage, people in crowdsourcing.
This is fantastic stuff, Emily. We're coming to the end here. If anybody would like to get in touch with you to learn more about what you're doing, how can they find you?
You can email me, and maybe spelling my name is always fun. So it's just emily.martuscello@fema.dhs.gov. But maybe we can put that somewhere, Todd, so people can spell it correctly.
For sure, we'll put that in the show notes below as well. And if you're driving down the road and your pencil's not sharp, don't worry about it. You can find it. Hey, one last question. We're in November, and matter of fact, we're doing the special on the 23rd 4th, right? The Wednesday before Thanksgiving, is what books belong on an emergency manager's bookshelf. I know you mentioned one right now, Team of Teams. What book do you think should belong on an emergency manager's bookshelf?
So I'll go with, so my day job at FEMA is continuous improvement. So I'm going to go with John Cotter's Our Iceberg is Melting. And I think organizational change at a large scale is an imperative for emergency management as a community. And it's kind of one of the frameworks I also use for crowdsourcing. So embrace change, and John Cotter's book, Our Iceberg is Melting, is a nice fable for all of us to read.
And Dan Scott says, great book with a big exclamation mark on that. So, all right. Thank you so much for your time today. And it's a pleasure talking to you. Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for spending time with us this morning and learning more about crowdsourcing and what it really means. I think it's something that we should really embrace if you are in the field of emergency management or any kind of crisis management for that matter. So we'll wait till next week when we're going to be in New York City. I can't wait for that event, and I can't wait to see it again. And follow us on Facebook. We have a Facebook group that if you guys want to join, you can really get active in there. We do a lot of fun stuff over there. And of course, we have the Facebook page. So follow us on Facebook. Love to have you there. Join us in what we're talking about and talk about crowdsourcing. We're also taking questions. If you want to ask Pete Gaynor or Craig Fugate, you can put it up there on Facebook. Until next week, stay safe and stay hydrated.